Welcome to HD Reddit Stories. If you enjoy heartfelt, true-to-life stories, we'd love for you to subscribe and tap the bell. Thanks for being here. Let's get into today's story. I stared at the hospital monitor blinking steadily beside my son's small, frail body. The sharp beeping sounds cut through the sterile air, each one a reminder that time was slipping through my fingers. My hands trembled as I clutched my phone, desperate for someone, to anchor me. Without thinking, I opened the messaging app and typed with frantic urgency. "Mom, my son is in critical condition. Please come." The message sent. The little read receipt showed up almost immediately. Relief flickered in my chest. Maybe she would understand. Maybe, for once, she would drop everything and be there. My fingers hovered over the screen, waiting for those 3 bouncing dots that meant she was typing. Instead, my phone vibrated once. A new message blinked at me. "We're busy with Margaret." No punctuation. No. "I'm sorry." No. "Is he going to be okay?" Just those 5 words, flat and dismissive, like they were brushing away an annoying speck of dust. Before I could even react, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and for a second, I foolishly thought maybe it was a misunderstanding, that she would explain, that she would come. I answered in a heartbeat. "Mom," I started, but she cut me off. "We're busy with Margaret. I can't talk right now," she said sharply, almost annoyed. Then she hung up. The silence that followed was louder than anything I had ever heard. I sat there, staring at the darkened screen, my ears ringing. In the fluorescent haze of the hospital room, everything slowed down. The nurses moved like ghosts past the doorway, murmuring to one another. Machines clicked and whirred around my son's bed. But all I could hear was the click of the call ending. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall and shatter it into 1,000 pieces. Instead, I stood there, stunned, feeling like a child abandoned on the side of a road, discarded because someone more interesting came along. Margaret. Always Margaret. My cousin who had never held down a job for more than a month. Margaret, who made reckless choices and expected everyone else to clean up her messes. Margaret, who somehow always ended up the center of attention, the one everyone bent over backward to save. And now, in the moment when I needed them most, my family had made it crystal clear, Margaret mattered more. I dropped into the hard plastic chair beside my son's bed, burying my face in my hands. Tears welled up, hot and stinging, but I refused to let them fall. My son needed me to be strong. He needed me present, not falling apart because the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had once again proven how little I mattered to them. I pulled my hands away and looked at him, pale, still, hooked up to machines far too big for his tiny frame. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. He didn't stir. "You have me," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You have me, and I'm not going anywhere." I wiped my face, squared my shoulders, and picked up my phone again. Not to call my mother. Not to call anyone in my family. I opened a new text thread, to a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in months but who had once told me, "If you ever need anything, seriously, call me. Hey, just wanted you to know, my son's in the ICU. It's bad. Could really use someone to talk to." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the send button. Was it weak to reach out like this? Was I setting myself up for more disappointment? Maybe. But I hit send anyway. The reply came almost instantly. "I'm on my way." "What room?" I stared at those words, my throat tightening painfully. No questions. No excuses. Just action. I stood up again, moving to the window overlooking the parking lot. The December night was cold and dark, but somewhere out there, someone was coming. Not because they had to. Not because it was expected. But because they chose to. And in that moment, I realized something that hit harder than any blow my mother could have delivered. Family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who shows up when your world is falling apart. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. "Hope everything works out. Let us know how it goes." Like it was some casual inconvenience I had dropped into her lap. I didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to explain, to plead, to beg for their attention or their affection. I didn't try to twist myself into something smaller, more palatable, easier for them to love. I simply turned off my phone and slipped it into my bag. In the quiet, I looked at my son again and smiled through the ache in my chest. "You're not alone," I whispered. "Neither am I." And for the first time that night, I believed it. The morning after the longest night of my life, I woke up stiff and aching in the hospital chair. My neck cricked painfully as I shifted, and for a moment, I just sat there, listening to the gentle, steady beep of the monitors. My son was still here. Still fighting. A nurse came in, all gentle smiles and practiced softness, checking his vitals and adjusting his 4. She looked over at me with kind eyes. You should get something to eat, she said. You need to take care of yourself, too. I nodded, but I didn't move. It felt wrong to leave him, even for a moment. Like if I stepped away, something terrible would happen. After she left, I checked my phone. Dozens of missed calls and texts, but none from my mother. None from my father either. Most were from friends reacting to the quick, panicked post I'd made on social media, asking for prayers. Strangers cared more about my son's condition than my own family did. When I finally found the courage to call my mother again, heart hammering against my ribs, it was my father who answered. What's the emergency? He said gruffly, as though I'd inconvenienced him by daring to reach out. I swallowed down the sharp words that threatened to spill out. Dad, he's still in critical condition. I thought you'd want to know. There was a pause. Then a dismissive sigh. You're overreacting, he said. Kids get sick all the time. You need to stop dramatizing everything. It's not good for anyone. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the sharp, choking cocktail of rage and heartbreak. He's not just sick, I said quietly. He almost died last night. Another long pause. I could imagine him sitting there in his recliner, the TV blaring some game he cared about more than the trembling voice of his daughter. Well, he said finally. Keep us updated. Then he hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, numb. They said I was overreacting. Like being terrified for my child's life was some kind of performance, some attention-seeking act. Like my pain was a nuisance. I could have cried. I could have screamed. I could have let it break me, the way it had so many times before. But instead, something inside me shifted. A quiet click, like the turning of a lock. Fine, I thought. You want to see overreacting? Watch me calm down. I stood up, stretched my aching limbs, and walked to the small, grimy bathroom attached to the ICU waiting room. I looked at myself in the mirror. Pale, hollow-eyed, exhausted. Good, I thought. Let it show. Let it be real. I splashed cold water on my face, straightened my spine, and walked back into the room like a soldier returning to battle. The next few days blurred together. A mess of doctors, specialists, test results, and cautious hope. I didn't leave my son's side unless I had to. I slept in stolen moments, ate granola bars from the vending machine, and drank terrible hospital coffee by the gallon. Friends came. Some brought meals. Some just sat with me, offering silent support. Not my family. Not once. Once, late at night, I checked my phone again. A new message from my mother. Hope he's doing better. We've been so busy with Margaret's engagement party planning. Can't wait for you to see the pictures. I stared at the words in disbelief, my stomach twisting into knots. My son was fighting for his life, and they were picking out table linens and flower arrangements. It hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't coming. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. They had made their choice. And I was making mine. I stopped updating them. I stopped reaching out. I stopped trying to shove myself into a family that had built a fortress with no doors for me. Instead, I focused on the people who did show up. The nurses who slipped extra blankets onto my chair without saying a word. The janitor who smiled at me every morning as he mopped the hallway. The friend who brought me a real meal and sat with me, even when I had nothing to say. One afternoon, as my son's condition slowly, miraculously began to stabilize, my friend Rachel came by with a cup of real coffee. You look like hell, she said bluntly, setting it down in front of me. But you're doing amazing. I laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. Thanks. I think. She pulled up a chair beside me. I don't know your family, she said carefully. But you deserve better than people who only show up when it's convenient. I stared at her, the truth of her words sinking deep into my bones. You deserve people who show up because it's inconvenient, she added. Because they love you enough to drop everything when you need them. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't too sensitive, too needy, too dramatic. I was finally seeing things clearly. Later that night, when the doctors told me my son was officially out of critical danger, I didn't pick up the phone to call my parents. I didn't send a text or an update. Instead, I sat there beside my boy, holding his tiny hand in mine, whispering promises he couldn't hear but that I would keep with every ounce of strength I had. You're safe, I told him. I'll never make you beg for love the way I had to. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. Did you see the pictures from Margaret's engagement? So beautiful. You really should come visit soon. Not a word about my son. Not a question about his health. Just a casual invite to resume playing the role of the afterthought. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, though I was. Not because I wanted to punish them, though part of me did. But because I realized that responding would be like showing up to a closed door and pounding my fists against it, begging to be let in. And I was done begging. I was done twisting myself into knots for scraps of affection. I was done pretending that their absence was somehow my fault. I had shown up. I had fought for my son. I had stayed, even when it was hard, even when it broke me. And they had not. They had called it overreacting when really, it was survival. It was love. It was choosing to protect something fragile and precious, even when it meant standing alone. And I would do it again. 1,000 times. I sat back in my chair, stretched my aching legs, and looked out the window at the pale winter sun rising over the hospital courtyard. A new day. A new beginning. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew this. It would be built on the people who had proven they were willing to show up in the dark, not just the ones who wanted to bask in the light. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt something like peace settle into my chest. Not the peace that comes from everyone liking you. The peace that comes from finally liking yourself enough to stop asking for scraps. When my son was finally stable enough to be transferred out of the ICU, I felt like I had been breathing underwater for weeks and had finally broken through the surface. The air was thin and shaky, but it was air. Life. Hope. The first day in the regular pediatric ward felt like stepping into a new world. A world where monitors still beeped and 4 poles still trailed behind every step, but where life was beginning to pulse again through tiny veins and cautious smiles. Nurses clapped me on the back, congratulating us like we'd crossed some invisible finish line. I nodded, smiled, thanked them, but inside, I was hollow. I wasn't thinking about celebrations. I was thinking about everything we had survived without the people who were supposed to be our safety net. I sat by my son's bedside as he slept, the sun stretching warm fingers across the hospital floor, and realized I hadn't spoken to my parents in days. Maybe a week. I had stopped counting. And the strangest thing happened, I didn't miss them. I didn't feel the old gnawing hunger for their approval or their attention. I didn't feel the panic that used to rise in my throat when I thought they were disappointed in me. I felt free. Without realizing it, I had stopped asking. I had stopped reaching out with trembling hands, begging for crumbs of affection. I had stopped inviting them into my pain, my joy, my life. I had closed the door. And almost immediately, they noticed. It started small. A text from my mother. Haven't heard from you. How's the little guy? No apology. No acknowledgement of the weeks of silence. Just a casual message, as if nothing had happened. I stared at it for a long time before putting the phone down without responding. 2 days later, another text. We're thinking of coming by to visit. Let us know when's good. I didn't answer. The next day, a voicemail from my father, his voice gruff but oddly tentative. Give us a call when you get a chance. Your mother's worried. Worried. Now they were worried. Not when I had called, sobbing and begging them to come. Not when I sat alone night after night, listening to the machines breathe for my child. Not when they shrugged off my fear as overreacting. Now. Because I had stopped knocking on their door. Because I had walked away. I leaned back in the stiff hospital chair, watching my son play with the plastic dinosaurs a nurse had given him. His cheeks were still pale, his movements slower than usual, but he was smiling. A real smile. I realized in that moment that he didn't need them, either. He needed me. He needed someone who showed up even when it was hard, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was terrifying. And that someone was already here. I turned my phone off and slid it into my bag. Weeks passed. My son grew stronger. The color returned to his cheeks, the sparkle to his eyes. I spent my days learning how to help him through his physical therapy sessions, how to coax him to eat, how to make the sterile hospital room feel a little more like home. Friends stopped by with meals and balloons and tiny victories. They became my family, the family I chose, not the one I was born into. Meanwhile, the messages from my parents kept coming, growing more insistent, more frantic. You're being unreasonable. We're your parents. We have a right to know how he's doing. Don't shut us out like this. It's cruel. I read them all. And I didn't respond. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. For the first time, I saw the pattern for what it was. Their love was conditional, transactional, based on their terms, their timing, their comfort. Not mine. I was done playing by their rules. One afternoon, as I sat by the window watching my son build a shaky tower of blocks, my phone rang again. My mother's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. Hello? I said, my voice calm, detached. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end. She hadn't expected me to pick up. Oh, honey, she said, her voice thick with forced sweetness. We've been so worried about you. Why haven't you called? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lifting off my chest. Because I needed to focus on my son, I said simply. And on myself? Another pause. I could practically hear her trying to recalibrate. Well, we wanted to come by. Maybe this weekend? She said. Margaret's free, too, so we could all come. Margaret. Of course. I almost laughed. After everything, they still thought I would drop everything, rearrange my life to make space for their convenience. No, I said, my voice steady. That won't work for us. There was a stunned silence on the other end. What do you mean? She asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. I mean, I said carefully, choosing each word like a weapon forged in the fire of my survival. We're not available. You're being unreasonable. She snapped. We're family. I closed my eyes and let the words roll off me like rain on stone. No, I said softly. You're relatives. Family shows up. And I hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. Not with fear, but with adrenaline. With release. I had finally drawn a line. And I had kept it. Over the next few weeks, they kept trying. More calls. More texts. Even a few voicemails where my father's voice cracked with something that almost sounded like regret. But I didn't answer. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I was building something new now. Something that didn't require their permission or their validation. My son got stronger every day. We had inside jokes. We built blanket forts. We celebrated every tiny milestone like it was a national holiday. One afternoon, sitting together on the grass outside the hospital for the first time in months, he looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes. Mom, he said, his voice serious. You're my best friend. I hugged him tightly, tears slipping down my cheeks. You're my best friend too, I whispered. And I realized that this life, this bond, this love, was worth more than anything I had ever begged for. It was real. It was earned. And it was enough. One evening, long after my son was asleep, I sat on the balcony of our small apartment, staring up at the stars. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother. We miss you. Please come home. Home. I smiled sadly. Home wasn't a place where I was tolerated. It wasn't a place where I had to shrink myself to fit. It wasn't a place where my pain was dismissed and my love was conditional. Home was wherever my son was. Wherever we were safe. Wherever we were seen and valued and loved without strings. I turned off my phone, tucked it into a drawer, and walked back inside. My son stirred in his sleep, murmuring something I couldn't quite catch. I sat beside him, brushing his hair back from his forehead, and whispered into the darkness. We're home, baby. We're already home. By the time we left the hospital for good, spring had arrived in a riot of color and light. Trees that had been stripped bare just months before now stood heavy with blossoms, and the world smelled green and new and impossibly alive. We walked out of those sliding hospital doors, my son's tiny hand wrapped tightly around mine, and for the first time in what felt like years, I exhaled fully. The sun warmed my face, the breeze tousled my hair, and deep in my chest, something uncurled, hope. We weren't the same people who had stumbled into that hospital in terror. We had been broken open, cracked down to our cores, but somehow, in the breaking, we had been rebuilt stronger. We moved into a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, but it was ours. The walls were blank slates, the rooms filled with echoes of possibility. I hung photos of my son everywhere, laughing, running, building Lego towers taller than himself. I wanted our home to scream life, to roar survival, to whisper, we made it. Our days filled quickly, therapy appointments, park picnics, slow walks down sun-drenched sidewalks. I found work at a local nonprofit, flexible hours, understanding coworkers. People who didn't flinch when I said I might have to leave early for a doctor's appointment. People who celebrated each tiny step forward with us. We were carving out a life. A messy, imperfect, glorious life. Meanwhile, my parents remained conspicuously absent. They called sometimes, left voicemails, sent texts. Invitations to family gatherings. Holiday dinners. Margaret's baby shower. I didn't go. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. Anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something sharper, cleaner, acceptance. They had made their choices. They had missed the nights I cried myself to sleep beside a plastic hospital bed. They had missed the mornings when I taught my son how to walk again, step by shaky step. They had missed the birthdays spent blowing out candles with trembling hands and whispered wishes. They had missed everything. And I wasn't waiting for them to catch up. One afternoon, months after our new life had begun to take root, I ran into my cousin Margaret at the grocery store. She was radiant, glowing with the smug, self-satisfied air of someone who believed the world owed her comfort. "Oh my gosh!" she squealed, throwing her arms around me before I could dodge. "We've missed you at all the family events." I smiled politely, stepping back. "I've been busy." She frowned, pouting slightly. "You should really come around more. Family's important, you know." I almost laughed out loud. Family's important. The words rang hollow in my ears. I nodded vaguely and moved to steer my cart away, but Margaret wasn't finished. "Grandma's birthday party is next weekend. You'll come, right? Mom and Dad will be there. Everyone's been talking about you, wondering why you disappeared." I paused, looking her dead in the eye. "I didn't disappear," I said calmly. "I just stopped standing where I wasn't wanted." Her mouth opened and closed, stunned into silence for once. I smiled, turned my cart around, and walked away. That evening, after my son was asleep, I sat on the balcony of our apartment, sipping tea and watching the sun melt into the horizon. My phone buzzed beside me, another text from my mother. "Hope to see you soon. Don't stay away forever." I stared at it for a long time, feeling nothing. Not the old yearning. Not the ache to be pulled back into their orbit. Just a kind of detached sadness, like watching a movie you've already seen and knowing how it ends. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone, wrapped myself in a blanket, and watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. They had missed the most important chapters of my life. The ones written in hospital corridors and late-night laughter and quiet, stubborn love. And I had stopped holding space for them in the story. Weeks turned into months. Seasons shifted. My son grew stronger, taller, bolder. His laugh filled rooms. His legs carried him across playgrounds and through adventures that left grass stains and scraped knees and triumphant grins. He didn't ask about them. He didn't wonder why they weren't there. Because he knew who was there, who had always been there. Me. One evening, as we built a blanket fort in the living room, he turned to me with a gap-toothed smile. "Mom," he said seriously, "you're my hero." I blinked back tears, swallowing the lump in my throat. "No," I said, ruffling his hair. "You're my hero." And it was true. He had survived. I had survived. We had survived together. Not because of the people who shared our blood, but because of the people who showed up, even when it was hard, even when it was scary, even when it wasn't convenient. One night, not long after his 5th birthday, I received a letter in the mail, an invitation to a family reunion. A glossy card, embossed with gold lettering, listing dates and times and locations. No mention of what had happened. No acknowledgement of the chasm that now yawned between us. I placed the invitation on the counter, stared at it for a moment, and then dropped it into the trash without a second thought. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I just wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't standing at the window, longing for them to notice, to change, to choose me. I had chosen myself. I had chosen my son. And in doing so, I had built a life so rich, so full, so breathtakingly beautiful that I no longer had space for people who only showed up when it was easy. As summer warmed the world around us, I watched my son run through sprinklers, shrieking with laughter, and thought, this is it. This is everything. They had missed it all. And somehow, that was their tragedy, not mine. I had been there for the sleepless nights, the small victories, the whispered prayers answered in the soft rise and fall of a tiny chest. I had been there for the brokenness, and the healing, the pain and the glory. I had been there. And I wasn't waiting anymore. Sometimes, the greatest realization in life comes not through grand gestures or dramatic endings but through a quiet, steady accumulation of truths too long ignored. It took facing the darkest moments alone for me to finally see it. Love is not defined by blood. Family is not a matter of DNA. It is loyalty, presence, and a commitment to stand beside someone when the world grows heavy. For too long, I had clung to the idea that if I just tried harder, if I called more, forgave faster, bent myself into more shapes, they would love me the way I deserved to be loved. I believed that their absence was somehow my fault, that my pain was an overreaction, a character flaw I needed to fix. But sitting alone in a hospital room, my son fighting for his life while the people who should have been my anchor chose party planning over presents, shattered that illusion forever. The lesson life handed me, wrapped in heartbreak and loneliness, was stark and simple. Stop chasing people who are perfectly content to let you stand in the storm alone. Stop mistaking shared history for unconditional love. Stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. When I stopped asking for their love, when I stopped chasing and explaining and justifying, something miraculous happened. I found peace. I found strength. I found that I didn't need their approval to be whole. I didn't need their validation to be valuable. I didn't need their attention to matter. True love, true family, shows up not because it is convenient or socially expected but because it is instinctive. Because they cannot imagine being anywhere else when you need them. True love doesn't keep score. It doesn't offer support with strings attached or expect gratitude for basic decency. And so, I learned that sometimes, letting go isn't an act of anger but one of profound love for yourself. It is an act of reclaiming your worth, of declaring that you are no longer available for half-hearted affection and conditional loyalty. I learned that absence can be as much of an answer as presence. The people who didn't show up when I needed them most had already answered every question I had ever silently asked. Do I matter to you? Will you choose me when it counts? Their silence, their excuses, their dismissiveness spoke louder than any apology ever could. But equally important, I learned that the world is full of unexpected family. People who show up without obligation, without fanfare, simply because they choose to. People who will sit beside you in sterile hospital rooms, who will bring coffee without being asked, who will celebrate each hard-won inch of recovery as if it were a mile. I learned that real love often comes quietly, without drama or grand declarations, but in consistent, steady presence. It comes in the nurse who checks on you long after her shift has ended. In the friend who drives across town just to sit silently by your side. In the janitor who offers a kind smile when you have forgotten how to smile yourself. It comes in the small hands of a child who looks at you with absolute trust, who doesn't care about your failures or your fears, who knows only that you stayed. The most profound lesson, however, was this: you don't have to wait for anyone to recognize your worth. You don't have to stand at the gates of someone else's heart, knocking and begging to be let in. You can build your own house. You can fill it with laughter and love and light, and you can lock the door to those who only ever wanted to visit on their terms. Forgiveness, I realized, is not always about reconciliation. Sometimes, forgiveness is a private act, a quiet decision to release the hope that the past could have been different. It is choosing to remember without reopening the wound. It is accepting what someone was capable of offering, and understanding it was never enough. And that's okay. Not everyone is meant to walk every step of your journey with you. Some people are meant to be lessons, not fixtures. Some relationships are meant to end, to make space for something better, something truer. By letting go of what could never sustain me, I made room for what could. I made room for genuine connection. For fierce, unwavering loyalty. For love that didn't come with caveats or expiration dates. Most importantly, I modeled for my son what it looks like to choose yourself. To set boundaries without guilt. To walk away from relationships that cause more harm than healing. To know, deep in your bones, that you are worthy of love simply because you exist, not because you earned it, not because you proved yourself, not because you twisted yourself into a shape small enough to fit someone else's comfort. I want my son to grow up knowing that love is not something you beg for. It is not something you earn through suffering. It is something you accept freely from those who offer it purely. I want him to know that sometimes, the greatest strength lies in walking away with your head held high, even when it feels like tearing yourself in two. I want him to know that it is not his job to shrink himself to fit into places that were never built for him. He deserves a life filled with people who see him, who cherish him, who show up for him without hesitation. And so do I. In the end, the greatest life lesson wasn't about them at all. It was about me. It was about realizing that healing isn't about waiting for an apology that may never come. It's about giving yourself permission to move on, to grow, to thrive. It's about knowing that you are enough, exactly as you are, exactly where you are. It's about understanding that sometimes, survival is the triumph. And that choosing yourself, unapologetically and without regret, is the bravest thing you will ever do.